Good evening. This is Maestro Cortella with the Dawn of War 2 Retribution Elite Modcast. Today we have a 1v1 on Green Tooth Gorge. Our first player is Harry, playing as the Lord Commissar. This is a slightly tanky melee hero, comes with a free energy shield, but it is the weakest energy shield in the game, can also execute his own troops to make them fight harder. His opponent is VindicareX, playing as Sindri, Trollface, Chaos Sorcerer. This is a spell casting and support hero. Not so great at fighting, but he's got a lot of other tricks up his sleeve. Alright then. So, Harry is a player who, I think I've seen him around at times. VindicareX. Now, VindicareX is a pretty big name in the, well, a pretty big name in the small world that is the Dawn of War 2 multiplayer scene. Very, very good player. I think there was actually a time when VindicareX was regarded as the best Dawn of War 2 player. I think it was a short period. I think it happened at a time when Holy Hammer had kind of ducked out of the Dawn of War 2 scene, and then Vindicare was kind of left as, I think, the best. But I think that his own period of being the best was also probably a little short-lived, and I think he himself ended up leaving the scene for a little bit. Nevertheless, he is an extremely good player, primarily known for his Chaos Lord rather than his Sorcerer, but he's definitely very good with the Sorcerer as well. Now, in the past, whenever I have been able to commentate a Sorcerer match, I have been accused of being biased in favor of the Sorcerer player. And I mean, of course, the Sorcerer is my favorite here. I do want to see Sorcerer players win, but part of the bias that I've been accused of has also been basically just talking more about the Sorcerer and what they do as opposed to what the Imperial Guard player would do, or just whatever opponent the Sorcerer player would be up against. But part of the reason for that is that since the Sorcerer is the hero that I've invested the most time in, by far, he is simply the hero that I know the most about. I bring a certain specialization and knowledge when it comes to commentating about the Sorcerer that I don't have with any other hero in this game, pretty much. Compared to the Sorcerer, my understanding of other heroes is quite a bit more superficial. So, and Imperial Guard vs. Chaos is classically long considered in favor of Chaos. I personally am kind of rethinking that, and there were times before I had stopped playing that I had personally kind of challenged it. And there are definitely certainly strong things that Chaos have in this matchup. One of their often cited advantages is the area of effect attacks that all Chaos heroes have access to, which can really, really wreck most Imperial Guard squads because they're made up of squads that have a lot of models but very low health per model. Maybe not very low, but definitely low. And mainly we're talking about the Guardsmen, but the Catachan Devils that we see right here, that applies to them as well. Now, what I think Imperial Guard has going for them in this matchup is I think they have a bit of an advantage in Tier 1. And where I think this advantage comes from is a lot in the Sentinel. The Sentinel being this basically unbleedable ranged unit that allows the Imperial Guard to, if they play it right, kind of secure an economic advantage early on, because it will be able to bleed models off enemy squads while not really receiving any bleed itself. And it also has a lot of staying power out on the field by the Sentinel takes damage, and then it's repaired by Guardsmen. And the Imperial Guard player will kind of play just a little game where once the Sentinel starts taking damage, the Guardsmen will repair. Once the Guardsmen start being targeted by the opponent, that is when the Guardsmen move away and the Sentinel starts tanking the fire without bleeding. And they just kind of go back and forth between that. Well microed, the Sentinel-Guardsman combination just has a lot of staying power. Now, that's technically true in any matchup. It's just a fact of how Imperial Guard plays in general. But what I feel is particularly strong about that against Chaos is that Chaos typically has the lowest opening range DPS of any race in Tier 1. Chaos Space Marines not being a particularly high DPS unit. Their DPS is rather average, and the Chaos composition just lending itself to having less ranged units basically in Tier 1. The best you can get usually is double Chaos Space Marines, and that's a little bit more expensive than getting double of most other starting ranged units. So what that translates to is Chaos having a lot more trouble to really put pressure on the Sentinel compared to other races. The Sentinel getting a lot more of what I like to call uptime, or really a term that I've actually borrowed from MOBAs. And that's more time it spends actually doing damage, being out on the field and achieving something, as opposed to other matchups where the Sentinel would have a lot more trouble doing that. When I think of matchups where the Sentinel might have trouble doing that, Orcs are definitely one with the high amount of ranged DPS they have coming out. Space Marines sometimes, because both Scouts and Tacs are ranged units, especially if combined with something like a Tech Marine, it can make it really hard for the Sentinel to get a lot of uptime, because it's often pressured into moving back so that it doesn't die entirely. Harry has only gone for the single Sentinel, and VindicareX, certainly known for his skill, maybe possibly not always known for the, I don't know, definitely not known as the most well-mannered person, but we're not talking like a Holy Hammer here, even though he was kind of a Holy Hammer replacement, in a sense. VindicareX actually interestingly going for a 1-1-1 build. I don't know if I put a few too many extra ones in there. He's gone for Raptors. Raptors typically considered a much more situational jump squad than Assault Space Marines. Their suppression on landing, in my opinion, it has always been weaker than the knockback, and it definitely has a lot of disadvantages compared to knockback. But I think some people have made arguments for suppression on landing having some other benefits. One thing it can work well for with the Sorcerer is that the Raptors can get suppression on landing. That was actually very, very brave by Harry, and also cutting it close. If he had waited a little too long on that ground pound, or especially if he had missed the ground pound, he could have lost his Sentinel right there. Now, I mean, the Sentinel is typically a unit. It has a job to do in Tier 1. And it's very crucial to the Imperial Guard Tier 1. It is a core unit to the Imperial Guard Tier 1. And I think the Sentinel is kind of strange and very unique in the way that it actually goes from being a core unit to really not being a core unit, to being more like a bonus unit, like a unit that's just nice to have once you get to Tier 2. Even though the missile launcher can make it very, very powerful, it's not quite as crucial to Imperial Guard surviving the way Tier 2, the way the Laser Sentinel or Multi-Laser Sentinel is to getting Imperial Guard through Tier 1. So VindicareX is really dominating on the map control right now. He has most of the map, but I mean, this game isn't over yet. Vindicare with both a lead in VPs. Right now he's definitely got resource control as well. He chose to get a vehicle, and his vehicle wasn't terribly early. The Blood Crusher usually being a very time-sensitive unit that you get when you have the window when you are either clearly ahead in tech, or when you feel like you should, at the very least, be going even in tech. I don't think you definitely very rarely go for a Blood Crusher if you're behind.
Enemy unit spotted. We are under attack.
Since it relies a lot on your opponent having relatively limited AV, and it becomes quite a bit harder to use once your opponent has sufficient sources of AV. Imperial Guard typically has a lot of good ways of handling emergency AV scenarios. They can get a lot of sort of almost minor sources of AV from a lot of different sources. Catachan Devils being one of them. They can get a Melt-A-Gun. Meanwhile, the Stormtroopers are actually choosing to upgrade to the Assault Kit. Could have upgraded to the Anti-Armor Kit to really give them some very heavy anti-vehicle capabilities, but it looks like he's going to rely on lighter sources of anti-vehicle capabilities so that he can get that hard anti-infantry damage. Blood Crusher, and one of the things I feel like we're going to see out of VindicareX in particular is some good worship play. But we're also going to see him lose an entire heavy weapon team. And what we definitely saw there, I actually feel that was a really good move by the Stormtrooper squad. And what I think was really good about that was that I think that was the first time Harry actually revealed to VindicareX that he had the Stormtroopers. I think until then, VindicareX had not seen the Stormtroopers at all, so he did not even know that that was potentially a threat. And that's just really smart, really great, capitalizing on a window that he will literally only get once in the entire game and making a big play out of it. Now, one thing that I don't entirely agree with here, Harry, I think maybe just dropping his micro a little bit. And yeah, there we go. Finally switching to the crack missile so that he can actually threaten the Blood Crusher. He had kept the Sentinel with the frag missiles loaded a little too long, so he wasn't able to threaten the Blood Crusher. And the Blood Crusher was just approaching. Although the Blood Crusher can have some very good uses, the Sentinel is actually a unit that really should actually pretty hard counter the Blood Crusher. I think that Sorcerer needs to go, and you know what? He might go down anyway. Risky play, and it doesn't look like Harry was able to capitalize right there. I feel with how much health the Sorcerer had right there in retreat, Harry should have been able to get a kill on the Sorcerer in retreat. And that also would have been a good play that would really help him a lot to get back into this game. Right now, although we have... They're pretty even, actually, as far as army goes, but VindicareX has a enormous VP lead, over 300 points. Hopefully this turns out to at least be a relatively even game in the end. So we do have the Chimera for Harry. Harry is very impressively keeping his Sentinel alive. It does look like at some point maybe he lost a Guardsman squad, I believe. I think he had 2 Guardsman squads, am I right? I hope so. Oh, what positioning! Maximum range on that las cannon. Now, the maximum range does mean that he should be able to get it out just fine, but Harry is using a flare just to be safe. The Blood Crusher is going in, I think, a little too hard for this kill, and I think this could be the end of the Blood Crusher, especially if the Catachan Devils get out of the Chimera. I believe they're inside the Chimera. Yeah, this is probably going to be the end of the Blood Crusher. One more missile will do it, and the Sentinel can chase, but I think the Sentinel, Harry possibly dropping his micro. Instead, Harry's going to lose the Sentinel and the Chimera. Major misplay there by Harry. He really, in my opinion, he should have won that engagement. I actually think pretty much the positioning was in his favor, and the composition was also in his favor. And I think the difference we're seeing there is in purely the execution. And I think that's part of the advantage that a player like VindicareX would have. One of the things that I feel in any game, what high level players can really have is execution, and I don't think I haven't seen VindicareX play this game that much lately. I do feel that he came on the winning end of that engagement, lost the Blood Crusher, but honestly the Blood Crusher is an expected loss. Like, the Blood Crusher is not supposed to last an entire game, and I think if it does last too long, the Blood Crusher, as you get into the later game, ends up being, in my opinion, possibly even a detriment, simply because it can become a micro sync. It's something you're microing without even really possibly achieving much. Now, VindicareX did kind of give up the field with the loss of that Blood Crusher, but I still feel it was a good advantage. He's got the VPs to spare. He can afford this. He's going to Tier 3, while Harry is, at this point, probably stuck in Tier 2, at least for a while. Going for an autocannon heavy weapon team, that's an interesting upgrade. It's not exactly the most hugely important upgrade at this point. Like, he doesn't really need that for anything, but I guess it's a relatively cheap upgrade that he can use to make potentially have a little bit more impact than a suppression team. He doesn't need a whole lot of control at this point, and to the extent that he needs control, I'd say he can probably take care of that with the Catachans, maybe. Commissar Lord, the Lord Commissar, so hard to get used to switching to calling him the Lord Commissar after years of calling him the Commissar Lord. And I do believe, and you can, I know some Warhammer 40k fans can be very unforgiving about knowledge about, you know, lore stuff, but I do believe the Lord Commissar is actually a lore valid designation for this particular character or hero. One thing that was really crazy there was the range damage we saw coming out of the Sword of Flame. Not the Sword of Flame, wow, the Rod of Warpfire. The range damage it was doing to that Commissar Lord. VindicareX moving in with the Raptors, And VindicareX has some interesting things going on right now. He lost that engagement trying to jump in with the Raptors. I feel like he jumped into a little bit too much, and we do have a bunker here. I don't see what kind of bunker this is, but actually this should be a medic bunker because of the healing aura that it should be giving to the units nearby. And Harry does actually seem like he is slowly putting himself back into this game. Has had the double cap for a little while now. He's coming to both threaten the triple cap as well as a generator bash, and those are all great plays that can put him back in this game. I don't feel like it will be enough, though. Even though he's certainly getting back in the game, and VindicareX, if there's anything VindicareX is not doing right, it's that he's not really putting himself, he's not really pressing the advantage to the point where he's going to be just extremely dominant and Harry can't come back from it. Like, VindicareX is still winning this game. He is still undoubtedly winning this game, even as I see these units getting pushed off, because as much as I see these units getting forced off, I also notice the back cap going on right here, and this is another thing that I feel we might see from a Seasoned Dawn of War player. He's playing on two ends, and he's allowing himself to, even though he's not gaining the advantage right now, he's preventing Harry from establishing too strong of an advantage. I think this play in particular right here, the decap, the power node destruction, as well as the decap on the power is very, very big, because that really keeps VindicareX as at an economic disadvantage. And one of the things we're also seeing is a Great Unclean One queued up. VindicareX definitely did not struggle as far as resources go in this particular game, and that's very, very important. I think that's definitely one of the things that Chaos can do to really try to make sure they keep an advantage in this matchup. To the extent that I think Imperial Guard can do well in this matchup, I think it a lot has to do with getting a nice economic advantage in Tier 1, using Sentinels to bleed Chaos Space Marine models so that the Chaos player has some requisition issues going into Tier 2, and then really minimizing bleed on the Imperial Guard player's end, just taking a few guardsman losses here and there, which are quite cheap. Now, I haven't even, as much as I talked initially about my potential bias or my specialized knowledge about the Sorcerer, I don't actually feel like I've talked that much specifically about the Sorcerer in this matchup. So far, I feel like the Sorcerer has been almost a little bit passive, but sometimes that's part of how the Sorcerer is. The Sorcerer has two main modes of play when you... in most matchups, he has two main modes of play. So he has kind of the long-range artillery from Doombolt style, where he just kind of hangs back and shoots Doombolts, like that. It's very high damage, has a lot of burst damage potential, but it does make him a little bit passive, because when Doombolts are on cooldown or when he has no energy, he's basically not really doing much. So there, it looks like the Sorcerer actually went down shooting Doombolts. He was a little too close. Here is an Imperial Abyss, and I love that we're seeing the special effect from the Tzeentch Abyss does wipe out the heavy weapon team that was inside the bunker, but not actually really damaging the bunker that much itself. We're seeing the bunker losing not even half of its hit points. So VindicareX, as much as I've been hyping him up, we are seeing some mistakes from him. I do feel his Sorcerer loss was a little unnecessary. Kind of just got focused down by ranged fire from the Stormtroopers. Stormtroopers, with their assault kit, they do have increased range. But the Sorcerer, if he's going to shoot Doombolts, he can still outrange even the assault kit Stormtroopers. He does not actually need to be in their range to shoot Doombolts. So I think that time he really just got caught out of position. So if this Sorcerer weren't dead, he could be shooting Doombolts. So that long-range artillery style with Doombolts is one primary way of using the Sorcerer. High damage, but he doesn't tend to get a lot of model kills that way, so he also doesn't tend to level much. And it's a very burst damage kind of thing. The other main way of playing the Sorcerer that we're not seeing in this match is when he uses the Sword of Flame as well as the Vestments of the Warp to teleport around, initiate. His damage potential is a little bit lower, but it's more sustained damage, and he can be a little bit more active as well as bleed models and get more levels. So some things are going on right here. The VPs are still in Vindicare's lead, and he's actually about to threaten a double cap with Harry. I don't know how he's going to get back into this game. One way, though, could be by taking out this Great Unclean One. I think he's going to need to try to go for Vindicare's natural VP before he attempts to go for his own natural VP. I think it'll be easier to get Vindicare's natural since the super unit isn't there, at least not yet. Although the super unit right now is limping back to base with only 475 hit points. Could limp back to base or could just limp somewhere. Heretics could worship and that would provide some regeneration as well. So the Stormtrooper play right now with they're infiltrated for now, but they will get uninfiltrated soon. Them coming over here to backcap is really the right thing to do. The only unit nearby is the Havocs, and the Havocs, they could force melee the Stormtroopers, maybe take a model, but I don't think they'll really be able to force the Stormtroopers off. And if the Stormtroopers decide to focus fire the Havocs first and use a grenade, that could be really, really bad for the Havocs. So at this point, I think the Stormtroopers, he's going to go for completing the cap. A little risky, but I think as long as he retreats, yeah, he's not going to lose the squad. Lost one model, and that does help to keep him in the game. He gets the double cap for a little while. Won't keep it for very long, or he'll kind of trade it. He's actually at the 2-to-1. So Harry is slowly clawing himself back into this game. And I hear a las cannon. But right now, the heavy weapon team, I don't feel is in a great situation. What are these Chaos Space Marines doing? Going for a decap on Requisition.
They've a solid 200 points now.
So, all things considered, Vindicare he's in the lead, but slowly losing it. Chaos Sorcerer has been down for a little while. I'm not sure. He might be waiting for it to go, the Sorcerer to become cheaper. At this point, the Sorcerer should just be 250 Requisition to buy back. Now, the Great Unclean One was brought out, and the Great Unclean One in this matchup I think can be a little bit tricky. What is tricky about the Great Unclean One in this matchup is that Guardsmen, with their plasma guns, are kind of the go-to choice for dealing with heavy infantry armor with the Imperial Guard. So I don't feel like Harry should be lacking for damage against the Great Unclean One. And we did see the Great Unclean One took a lot of damage. It has 6,125 hit points. Its damage, its hit points, Harry was able to take its hit points down all the way to about 400. So VindicareX is pushing back out, does get his Sorcerer back, and now he's going for the Tome of Subjugation. This is one of the more interesting war gears, and it is also one of the war gears that has long been kind of debated, contested, argued about. And a lot of the Sorcerer's stuff, certainly a lot of the things in his accessory slot, in fact, every single one of his war gears in his accessory slot, really toe the line between both overpoweredness and unviability. And that's really, that is the kind of thing that sounds ridiculous. Like, how could it be either unviable or overpowered? Those two are almost the opposite things. But it's the kind of thing where, because of how those abilities are designed, when they're made in a way that can work, they tend to be, like, overpowered. And, well, if they're made a little too weak, then they just kind of don't work. So Sorcerer right here, though, is actually having a lot of trouble being relevant. Right now, it's mainly the Great Unclean One that's doing things. VindicareX, with the single cap, though, even though he doesn't feel like he's winning this engagement, does manage to get the Subjugate, though, on the Ogryn squad. So that Tome of Subjugation basically mind controls the Ogryns, or really any targeted squad. And typically, if you're going to use an ability like Tome of Subjugation, you want to use it on some kind of high-value squad. So typically, that means melee units first, because melee units across the board generally have higher DPS values than ranged units, and especially if it's a tough melee unit, something like Ogryns. Alright, this is Harry's last chance, pretty much. He's basically relying entirely on this Commissar Lord to get the decap, not even to necessarily survive, just to get the decap. Gets the 1-to-1, but the Commissar Lord is going to get picked up by the Great Unclean One and tossed around for his troubles. So he died for the Emperor, very much like a true hero, fighting against the Great Unclean One, which is great. Ogryns going for this extremely risky decap, losing a model. They even lost the Bonehead leader, but VindicareX is already getting the cap first on the middle VP, so even if he goes for this decap, shouldn't get it in time. This should be the game in favor of VindicareX. The only chance is he needs to get these heretics off the point. Grenade goes in. That's actually enough to stall out. So for the time being, this game is still going, but Harry only with 4 VPs left. So it's too bad for VindicareX that the Great Unclean One can't cap. Otherwise, he would just be able to win the game. Ooh, and Ogren spending a lot of resources, and by resources I mean models, trying to stay in this game, but there's another Tome of Subjugation. Now, I think another thing that kind of goes with some of the Sorcerer's abilities is sometimes they tend to be win more abilities, in that they're abilities that help you a lot when you're already winning, but don't necessarily help you if you are not winning. Some people would disagree with that, particularly when it comes to the Tome of Subjugation, since the Tome of Subjugation basically takes a unit away from your opponent and makes the unit yours for a few seconds. But sometimes actually making that happen, making the Tome of Subjugation happen in the first place successfully can be very, very difficult. That VP cap is going to finish. Wow! Really just went all in. Sorcerer died finally right there. However, I do feel Harry, was a little slow on focusing down that Sorcerer. I think he could have killed that Sorcerer before the Sorcerer finished the cap, but he did. And Vindicare just went for it, kind of just bullied his way through it, and won the game. Great game. Hope you enjoyed the cast. Have a good night.